last topic for today. I want to turn and talk about, we were just hearing about the Iranian regime, their commitment to be a jihadist. The regime itself in the Constitution is dedicated to the Islamic conquest mission, the conquest mission of jihad, engaging in holy war to take over the world, to put in place a caliphate that rules the world, eliminates all other governances. The caliphate rules the world under Islamic law called Sharia. This is the mission of the country of Iran. They put it in their constitution. Keep that in mind when I turn to these next stories. We want to talk about today, and the last story for today, are kind of a series of stories, have to do with the growing Islamic aggression in America. And I'm going to tell you about 5 stories. They all happened in the last couple months. And the reason they're important, number one, because the conduct by the people in America, these are Muslims in America, engage in some form or other of jihad, of Islamic aggression, of conquest Islam. And you barely hear these stories reported in the mainstream media. You barely hear them reported. And when you do hear them reported, they're never put in the context of connecting the ideology of conquest Islam, the ideology you just heard Claire Lopez describe as embraced in the Iranian Constitution, the conquest ideology that says the purpose of Islam is to force itself on the rest of the world, to use jihad, to engage in a holy war against the rest of the world, to bring one caliphate to the world, to rule the world. This is actually what Iran thinks. This is actually consistent with Islamic doctrine, consistent with the teachings of Islam. In fact, tomorrow I'll tell you, I have a guest coming on, Raymond Ibrahim, who is an extraordinary scholar. He is Middle Eastern, though he grew up in America, and he is an extraordinary scholar and wrote a book, Sword and Scimitar, which recounts from the days of the founding of Islam, the wars engaged in on behalf of Islamic warriors for the purpose of conquering other countries, other religions, other peoples, to force them to convert to Islam since the days of the founding of Islam. The point of his book is what we're seeing today, Islamic aggression, the ISIS warriors, the way Iran behaves. This is just the latest version of the same kind of conduct that has occurred over and over and over and over for millennia since the founding of Islam. It is written into the founding doctrines, the founding ideology of Islam that devout Muslims must pursue jihad for the purpose. They must pursue holy war. They must engage in it to force, to kill or convert infidels, to bring ultimately a caliphate ruling the world. I'm not saying, of course, every Muslim engages in or embraces this or engages in conquest Islam. I'm saying it's what the doctrine teaches, and you'll hear that from him tomorrow. But I want to turn just a few instances, a few things that have happened in America, and I want to posit that we need to see the connection between the conduct of the Iranian government in funding Hamas, funding Hezbollah. They are funding the jihad through these organizations that I mentioned, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, because they are part of the mission, the conquest ideology of Islam. First story to understand is that Islam has, as its rule, as its law, it's called Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. It is intended by devout Muslims and by the founder of Islam, Muhammad, and by imams and mullahs around the world. It is intended to be forced upon others. It is intended to replace all systems of law. It is intended to be the higher law to replace the law of the country wherever the people are. So let me now hit these stories in America. There, in America, we had in a mosque in Philadelphia, there was uncovered recently Islamist child bride scandal. In Islam, men can have up to 4 wives. Men can marry young girls. Muhammad married a 6-year-old, consummated the marriage when she was 9. This is occurring in America. There's a mosque in Philadelphia, uncovered, fortunately, by the FBI. And in this mosque, it was discovered that the imam in that mosque was engaged in, permitting, and facilitating marriage between grown men and very young girls. There was a girl who was 14, and she's now 17, came forward allegations of sexual assault. But as the FBI began investigating, it turns out this mosque has been permitting and engaging in child marriage, and the marriage is being consummated by grown men with young girls. In fact, the girl complaining, who is 17, said this guy she's complaining about was her second marriage because the first one didn't work out. When the FBI begins investigating, they're discovering that actually other Muslims in the community were saying, yeah, we knew something was kind of off over there. Didn't seem quite right. So not every Muslim was in support of this, but no one speaks up. Except the girl finally came forward and got the FBI investigating. So this is, again, a mosque in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the United States of America, marrying adult men to young girls because that is permitted in Islam. This is an example of the Islamist mentality that says, it doesn't matter what your laws say, America. It doesn't matter what your laws say, Pennsylvania. Sharia is higher law than any law you have. Sharia permits these marriages. Islamic law, Sharia, says it's okay, so therefore it's okay. And they do it in America, well aware that it is not permissible in America. But the mindset of the true devout Islamist is Sharia trumps law everywhere. Sharia trumps America's law about marriage age. It trumps the law of the state of Pennsylvania about the marriage age. So this has now been uncovered and is being investigated. There was a Syrian refugee who actually came to America. This is a second story. A Syrian refugee named Mustafa Musab Al-Awaimar, age 21, came to America as a Syrian refugee in August of 2016. He has been arrested for a terror plot intending to bomb Christian churches in Pittsburgh. He was a Pittsburgh resident, was arrested in terrorism charges, and he said he was doing these attacks on Christian churches in the name of ISIS. So he thought he was negotiating with someone who's going to help him get a hold of weapons to blow up Christian churches in Pittsburgh. Fortunately for the churches in Pittsburgh and for America, he was actually talking to undercover agents. But this was an Islamic refugee that met our vetting standards. Let that sink in. An Islamic refugee from Syria who met our vetting standards in August of 2016, so this is still under President Obama's vetting standards, came to America, and he said as his reason he wanted to take revenge for our ISIS brothers in Nigeria. And we're not even going to go there today on ISIS in Nigeria, but I will mention, you might have heard or remember we talked about before how, when President Trump came along, he said, we are going to conquer ISIS in the Middle East. The ISIS have begun to develop its caliphate in Iraq and Syria, a growing area, which they are claiming as the Quran requires, as fundamental Islam, conquest Islam requires, to begin to set up a caliphate, a region where Islam is the law, Sharia is the law, and Islam governs all. President Trump, with the just determination and fortitude to say we're going to stop these people, had a military victory, pretty much surrounded ISIS and brought it down to a tiny little area. I believe they've been finally eradicated. But ISIS isn't gone because ISIS is a mindset. ISIS is a mindset rooted in the teachings of Islam, just like the Iranian Constitution that is rooted in the teachings of Islam. ISIS is sprouting up all over the world. And ISIS is engaged in the same kind of conduct as ISIS was in Iraq and Syria all over the world. So this guy met America's refugee standards, came to America from Syria, and was arrested for allegedly planning to bomb Pittsburgh churches. Fortunately, got caught. Next story. The FBI recently discovered a homegrown Islamic terror compound in Alabama. And I want to tell this story just to make this point. You see in news stories that people will say, well, this was a lone wolf. This was not affiliated with ISIS, not affiliated with any known terror group. That is a throwaway, silly point for any reporter to include in the story. The common thread of all of this Islamic jihadist conduct, the common thread is the teachings of Islam. It is what the Quran says to do. It is Sharia. Every sect of Islam embraces Sharia, and Sharia understood to be the law that must govern all things, every aspect of life, not just, the parallel to the Ten Commandments or some other religion's teaching. Sharia is overarching. It governs every aspect of human experience. No other law can exist in the same place as Sharia. Sharia is intended to govern over all. So whether this Alabama homegrown Islamic terror compound was connected to ISIS or not, or connected to any other terror group or not, is completely irrelevant. What is relevant is right here in a small Alabama town in Macon County, an FBI search warrant was executed on property that was a makeshift military-style obstacle course. The land where the group gathered looked like an abandoned dump led by Siraj Wahaj. And if you don't remember that name, we talked about him before in the show. I can't even get off on that today because I want to get to my why these matter to you. But the point is, in Alabama, a training center and this was again discovered in May of this year by the same guy who's been in trouble before in a homegrown Islamic terror compound in Alabama. Last story before we get to two more stories really quickly. New Jersey woman was arrested for engaging in online efforts to recruit terrorists to join ISIS and go over and fight. So she's caught. They arrest her at the airport. She's going to be detained. She agrees to turn state's evidence, to help the government. Instead of facing long jail time, she's like, okay, I'll help. So she purportedly was helping the government. She's running these requests to find terrorists and then get turned over to the government. Turns out she was it's a kind of strange thing to call her, but a double agent. She was faking out the U.S. government, pretending she was cooperating while still actually engaged in online recruitment. Government finally figured it out. She's using different aliases. Now she's in more trouble. But this is a woman in New Jersey that you might see at the grocery store. You might see on your street, walking down the street, a mom at your kid's school engaged in trying to recruit people to go over and fight for ISIS. The last story is in Wisconsin. A resident, Wahiba Dias, pled guilty to attempting to provide material support to ISIS. It was a Department of Justice press release in April, referring to evil ideology embraced by Islamic terrorists is not limited to specific geography. ISIS supporters can be found within the borders of the U.S. I can't do the rest of the stories because I will run out of time, but the reason I'm doing those stories today is this. We have to connect the dots that the common thread in the conduct of the Iranian government, the conduct of Hezbollah, the conduct of Hamas, the conduct of ISIS, the conduct of the Islamic terrorists around the world who have been killing Christians in breathtakingly huge numbers. The common thread is Sharia, the law of Islam. The common thread is Islam. And as strongly as we fight to bring down the Iranian regime, because they are truly engaged in jihad on behalf of their country, we have to be that strong in America, standing up as we recognize, number one, these stories are happening here. And I just gave you a sampling. You could read many more if you took time to dive in and understand them. But it's happening here. It's the same ideology, the same reason to be very, very concerned about the presence of Islamic fundamentalism in America. It's not really Islamic extremism or people deviating from Islam. It is people following the teachings of Islam in America. Not saying every Muslim, but the teachings of Islam itself are being followed right here, and they pose a danger to this precious country, America.